Hello, and welcome to our series, Lunch with Live in America. My name is Cynthia Post Hunt, and I'm the programmer for dance and theater at the Momentary. Today, I'm here with Carra Martinez, our director of Live in America, and our friends from Detroit, Leyya Tawil and Ben Hall. And today's lunch theme is soup. Carra?
Hi, I'm Carra Martinez. I'm the director of Live in America. Live in America is a new contemporary performance festival that will be at the Momentary in October of 2021. And it's trying to think differently about how performance lives in communities from across the US into its territories and a little bit into Mexico. And we're working with 8 communities across the project. You've met some of them already. And today we are with Detroit, which is so exciting to me in my heart. You will hear baby on and off in the background, maybe a dog. We're all good with that. But I'm going to let these two fine folks introduce themselves. So go ahead, y'all.
Hi, my name is Leyya Tawil, and I am the artist facilitator for the Detroit region for Live in America, a Detroit native, and a artist and producer and excitable human. Thank you.
I'm Ben Hall. I love that excitable human. That's a tough one to top. I'm here in Detroit. I'm a composer and a sculptor. I teach at Bennington College in the Food Studies program in the Center for the Advancement of Public Action. My primary work is, I guess, how organizing as just a kind of basic role builds communities moment to moment. And a lot of that, as Carra kind of pointed out, is about soup. For many years, I ran the Russell Street Deli in the Eastern Market, where we did all sorts of community activist things based on having this kind of shell of a capitalist enterprise that we use for all the sorts of organizing that I thought were necessary in this community.
Ben, will you tell folks why, in particular today, soup is the thing we want to eat? What is your personal connection to capitalism and soup?
Well, nice. Well, I still own a company called Little Pot Soup. We sell soup in kind of all the local markets, but we also do emergency food, which is hard in its own way, trying to get food to the people. There's so many hurdles to that. But I think the biggest thing is that, you know, soup starts out as collage. Initially it's collage, you do the cut, you put things together. But then the vessel that you create, whatever that vessel is in a given metaphor, allows for this reaction to happen between ingredients, and the cell walls open up, and you know, the carrots start to taste a bit like the meat, and the meat starts to taste a bit like the onions, and things break down and commingle in such a way and turn into this kind of emulsion that creates this sense of place and also creates a human being moment to moment, right? You are literally what you eat. It becomes the Argonaut. We just replace ourselves with that food that we take in, whether it's cultural, spiritual, or physical food. I'm like, what's the other kind?
That's Little Pot Soup, Detroit. Just want to give a clear shout out.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, Ben and I have had many a good cooking conversation. Let's start out with the question we ask everybody, and there's no right answer to this. We've received many answers already, and it kind of guides how we think about things. And it's the simple question of, it's simple, but it's hard. Like, what does America mean to you? What does it signal? What does that word do? What does it make you think about? What reaction does it provoke? Yeah.
I'll jump in. You know, as soon as I sort of read that question, like, this is something that we're gonna ask everybody. Like the only, the very clearest thing, kind of the only thing that came to mind was the word work. Like because I'm daughter of immigrants, like have always thought of like this sort of territory as a place to come to work. And then also growing up in Detroit, Metro Detroit, like the ethos, it's like you grow up with work as like a driving concept. So like my America is very much based on sort of an like we work here and we come here to work and we work and we make things, and this is like it's kind of the action of it. So to me, America is like an action of working. But I think of it like conceptually, like I don't what I couldn't land at all was any kind of like land border sort of delineation of like America's the America. It's more of an idea than a place to me. And I leave it there.
For me, that's a good one. In a way, this is a bit of a response, but America's a pyramid scheme. I have thought, if I'm not, I kind of, because of COVID, there was a minute there where I actively, I guess there's a refusal of work. Maybe that work's no longer available, and that's something that I had been pushing towards for a while. This idea that, you know, making things is wonderful, monetizing things is shit. And can I cuss?
Yeah.
Am I allowed to cuss? Okay. That's, I like need that cuss button from the FCC or something. But that's just, that's about as nice as it gets in Detroit. But I think, you know, as a consequence of COVID and taking time off and having to rethink about whether the company is going to stay open, you know, we wouldn't be open without a PPP loan. We're just kind of eking along. We got to start paying that PPP loan back because it hasn't yet been authorized to, whatever it is, get cleared so that it's just money. But, you know, people still need to eat. And I think my Detroit is so much about, or sorry, my America is so much about Detroit. And, you know, it's the place where that has the biggest home ownership historically in the country. And the homes aren't worth anything. The taxes, you know, over 4 years end up being more than the house. But for those taxes, you don't get any service on a block where there's no other homes. It just really beats you up. And I think that, you know, when I look at the amount of money that the 1% is making right now, and I look at the way that Detroit looks and the straight scramble, there was a time where in Detroit, everything was like about 15 years older than everywhere else in the country. You just go to Chicago and all of a sudden you're like, whoa. You know, just certain blocks where all the cars, even in a city where, you know, cars are discounted because they want to keep this methodology of prosperity at least looking alive, you're still dealing with all these things that are about 15 years older. And it's like everybody's walking with a limp. And, you know, people have, and I know this because I had a cyst on my forehead for a while. And I would tell people it was a spider bite. But, you know, it was like a golf ball on my forehead. And it's not a good look. And other people would walk in and they would have stuff growing out of their face. And I was like, oh, yeah, these are just the other people who can't take care of it because you don't have the money. And so that kind of limping forward is something I've seen a lot of the last 4 years, and it seems to be back. I don't know what it is, but that pyramid scheme, I mean, even if you look at it like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at that top, you know, that's still a consumer and savings-based win for self-actualization.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting too to think about, like work was my dad is my grandparents are immigrants, undocumented, and work was their, like, that's the number one value. I think I can't remember my dad having less than 3 jobs. Like, and he had, one of them would be really a good paying job, but you had 3 jobs. And our value as kids was also we could work. Like we were working on our family farm, but you worked. Like that's how you, in some way, I think the psychology behind that was that's how you prove your right to be here in terms of immigrant families. If you can unquestionably show your productivity, even if it's not generating capital, but at least you're doing that gesture of labor.
Yeah, and it also is like it gives reason to why you left in a way, like particularly like in the Arab diaspora. Like, why would you leave like the paradise of the Arab world to come to this like unknown land? Well, to work, you know, not to like. So yeah, it's like there's a prosperity element. There's like to up level on the pyramid, like the whole thing. But there's also like I had to come because I have to work, and that's the only reason I would have left this beautiful home.
Yeah, and I was thinking about when I was hanging
occupation and the whole other like layers of it. But there's also like a beauty that you're leaving that you have to like make sense of.
Yeah. I was thinking when I was in Detroit, we drove around for hours. Like mainly we drove, like, which I loved. But I remember thinking about, and Ben, this is sort of what you're pointing to, like what happens when systems of labor fail. And like looking at the Packard plant and being around it, or thinking through, Leyya, how you would teach me to watch neighborhoods and like emptiness in neighborhoods and like storefronts that were open and closed. And then what it meant, like, how do you like observe all this, but not be like a weird cultural leaf peeper of like poverty and tragedy, but looking at that American system of labor, which we've been trained to do, and clearly the evidence of it having fallen apart for a lot of people, and a lot of people of color in particular. Yeah.
Sorry, was that a question to me?
No, I
was
was
that? Oh, okay.
I was just talking. You're just like thinking about what y'all were making me think about, saying it out loud.
Well, I would say I have like one tiny add-on, or maybe it's two tiny add-ons. One is that I used to work with these two brothers, and they would rehire into Target, knowing that they were going to get kicked off at like 87 days, because that's when the benefits kick in. It's just kind of automatic, like something comes up on the schedule alert. And they both went to public high school in Detroit, so there's kind of some challenges there. Black. And then my mom got a job at Target, and she got fired on day 86. And I was like, oh, this is just like a system-wide thing that they do. And I think whenever, kind of like when our last president first got into office, and some guys that I know would say, oh, well, you got to wait and see. Or, you know, like, you got to give a guy a chance, something. We gave your guy a chance. I'm like, well, it's not my guy, first of all. But, you know, they would tell these stories about, you know, when I was a kid, I did anything I had to. You know, my family, we came up hard, something. And, you know, I delivered papers and I mowed lawns. And I was like, what are you talking about, man? Because when I was a kid, you're only about 10 years older than me. When I was a kid, adults already took those paper jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Adults already took those lawnmower jobs.
Yeah.
Right? Like a lawnmower, that's an infrastructure. You need to have a place to store that mug. You need to be able to like carry it. You need to be able to get to the gas station. There's a lot of different steps there, which means that someone was setting you up. So when they're saying like, oh, there's a ladder to success, I think a lot of those rungs that haven't even been articulated are just gone. They're missing. So if you're you know, Spider-Man enough to climb up the side of it, or climb up some other way to get to the top of the ladder, you still have to address the ladder, and then you're just in line anyway. So I don't know. It's interesting talking to employees in Detroit who, like me, either didn't graduate high school or went to Detroit Public High School, and then alternately talking to my students at Bennington College, and basically having to tell each group the same story, mm-hmm. right? To not delude them about, yeah, you could just work here for 10 years and it's all going to work out. It's like, nah, That's just not actually how it works. We could close at any time, and then you would essentially be back to square one. So I guess that's where the pyramidness of it, a wide base of people who keep going back to square one. That's something that we just see so much in Detroit, and it's, still after this recent foment of energy in the city with development, the average income for a family of four has only ticked up about $1,500 to $27,700 a year.
So just say the number again, family of four.
27,700 a year. So, and that's the average. That means there's a lot of people making 120 grand that are actually bringing that number up for the people who are making $7,000 a year.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, y'all talk about like another, so when I was in Detroit, we like hung out at Leyya's house, we had snacks, got to know folks, and we also would drive around and look at art spaces. And Leyya would talk about, like, you would look at those spaces and you would go, that's a new space, but it's not Detroit. Will y'all talk about, for you, like a true Detroit-based artist, what does it mean? Like, how do y'all collaborate? How do y'all work together? What does it mean to navigate the kind of fiscal landscape that you're describing, which also, of course, is a social landscape when you're making art? Like, how do you survive? How do you do it? Go wherever you want with that.
My whole relationship to like art making in Detroit has been in kind of two worlds. Like, one is a very isolated one. Like, I always kind of understood art making as almost like a solo like basement practice. Like, this is what you do in your basement. And so in a way it was like an isolated practice that eventually brought you into like-minded time space realities with other people. Like, so but I think that like it never felt like a scene in the way that, I've been involved in like scenes in other cities, but Detroit, the people I work with in Detroit are all people that I find like I'm in community with on like some other level shit. And then it kind of like feeds into either art making or art conversations that lead to projects that lead to supporting other people that lead to this and forward and back. But what brought us together wasn't like a scene as much as it was like family zone, like family zone or just like thought zone in a way. So I don't know. I find that's different because like I wouldn't be able to identify for myself like the scene I roll in a way. I don't know. I would like to, like, Ben is way more on the ground on these things, and so, and has run gallery spaces as well as performed in every corner. And what's your take on that?
I have, it's making me think about a lot of things. Well, I think first of all, I love that idea of the isolated basement practice, right? Because in a way, that's where it starts out. But the first thing that I'm reminded of is that, like, a few years ago, I gave a talk at Star Chefs as part of their conference about the role of the chef activist or chef organizer or something. And the moderator kind of got to the point, he was like, yeah, Ben, but like, you're in it. How do you get involved? And I was like, yeah, you show up. And then you show up some more. And a lot of times, like when especially chefs in Detroit, they would say like, well, how do you engage with that person? And it's like, what do you mean, how do I engage with it? You want me to introduce you? Yeah. But like, how do you do the thing? And I'm like, it's a bit the same as art. I mean, on the kind of like activist or just being engaged level, or also volunteerism. It's like that thing where someone's like, oh, you work at a soup kitchen or you do a mutual aid thing. How do I get involved? And then you show up to the first meeting and everybody's like, yeah, it's cool that you're here. But like one meeting is not going to like make this, like one meeting does not necessitate me learning your name. So I think like so that's like the first thing about that is like, it takes a long time. Like the people who I think have really made successful spaces and meaningful spaces are spaces that you know you can go, and I think that that takes 10 years. I think it is a bit like restaurants, this idea that, you know, people always say restaurants fail so quickly. It's like, no, small businesses fail quickly. Restaurants are a worse model, but like you combine a small business model and a restaurant model, of course it's going to fail. And I think that's the true of like a lot of small not-for-profit spaces, right? They have to scale up at least to a certain size to have a space or a lease or rent. And that money usually necessitates that either it's a committee or someone's disinvested because they have the cash to do it, or they don't have the cash to do it, so they're making decisions, weird decisions. But, you know, things take time. I think, you know, the recent shift at MoCAD, which, you know, I think has always had a bit of a personality disorder because it should be a punk space. It's an all cement space that is still beautiful. But then, you know, they still have to do the things for the board, you know, and like they talk about like, you know, did you see Danny Meyer's new restaurant at the Whitney? It's like, yeah, I also see Danny Meyer's adjacency to an incredible amount of capital to keep a place like that open, right? Yeah. So I think that like some of the smaller spaces, and I think what Leyya was talking about, like about running galleries, I mean, it's more like about like running spots that are passive. I would always try to find the most passive spot, like a living situation where there's a big room. Now that's a gig space, or that's a performance space, or there's a separate bedroom or a squat. I mean, coming up through graffiti, I think, especially in Detroit, the way that and not being like part of a crew, really being alone, like enjoying the kind of like lone gunman look. So much of it was not about like, oh, these spaces aren't being used, so we're going to like put shit all over them, but was to like kind of tuck something in so that it wouldn't get painted over, almost so it would barely be seen, so that it could have a longer half-life. And I think that that kind of, you know, when you look at sustainability in businesses or art, you know, I learned this from somebody who's much smarter than me, which is usually how I get smarter. I imagine what a person smarter than me would do, and then I do that thing. They say, well, you know, the whole level of sustainability is that if you're trying to like budget your time or time allotment or resources, and something's hard and you don't see it as getting easier in 6 weeks, then that's just some shit you have to do that's going to be hard every week. And you're probably not going to do it because you don't want to do it and it's hard. Mm-hmm. And that was a real like kind of like swift spiritual kick to the head from me. And I think in Detroit, the places that have really succeeded are places that have either enough people to have a thing that keeps them moving forward, you know, as a space, but
like
also
a collective sense of responsibility.
Yeah, but also from the kind of customer base. I mean, I think the kind of most important is there's like a every Wednesday, I think, or maybe it's once a month. There's like a Wednesday breakfast art thing where everybody gets 10 minutes. It's like Pichakucha, but like for black folks at a diner. And it's primarily black artists. But like that's not something I feel like when you see the New York Times article, they're talking about like some whatever, or, you know, some travel magazine. Yeah. There's nothing actually sexy about it in the way that like can be sold, but it's so you can't get a seat in those places. You know, like you show up and people are like, nah, there's nowhere to come in, or you're just going to be uncomfortable because you have to stand for the next hour and a half. And I think that that's a more beautiful model, but also, you know, kind of just, you know, we're talking about land right acknowledgement and settler colonialism. I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about the way that the Great Migration happened, like, you know, encouraging all these black folks to move to Detroit and then leaving them high and dry. So like if a space also in Detroit isn't articulated as a POC space, this, to me, it's a real problem, and I have a hard time engaging in those spaces. So I'm also missing some wavelength. Like I'll look at like the photo from the first show, and it's 130 white people. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going back there. I'll check back with you in 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Under the radar part of it, like I think that like in terms of what Ben was saying about the the graffiti tucked away so it has a longer half-life, and then also like the venues that can just like sit passive for longevity, and like the efficiency of that, actually, and not the sort of like the neediness of the other, and not even neediness, but the sort of like the push of the other. I think like that's a really good metaphor too for like, I don't know, like the growth mechanism, the renaissance cycles that cities are going through. Detroit, obviously, like as soon as you have all the spotlight of like what's there, then it like distorts. It distorts, right? The sort of like the lay low sort of unicorn. If you're in the know, then you know where to go. Sitch. So I don't know. I'm free associating, but something I just wanted to like land that thought while we were in it. So
Yeah, I was thinking about, Leyya, do you remember where were we when we saw the artist talk with Sheepy McFly?
where were we?
Huh?
Wait, where were we?
When I
At the event, or where were we when we went to that?
what was the name of that locale?
That was then what is the gallery space that's like Wayne State campus, corridor, like behind? It's like Detroit art space.
Yeah. But that was like the most, I wrote about that because it was the most fascinating. It was
Detroit Artist Market.
Detroit artist.
Yeah. So we go in, we're like met with quality snacks and beverages. And we go into a room where Leyya and I may have been the only non-Black folks in that room, other than whoever ran that space. Yeah. That artist was both, there was like a DJ in the back, he was painting and getting a finger wave during the conversation. And he wanted his stylist there, or I don't know what you say when someone gives you a finger wave, or barber, because that's the person he talks about art with the most. And then maybe we were there 10, 15 minutes and his mom and auntie came in. So the conversation stopped. We acknowledged mom and auntie. People, like, there's a call and response going. And it was the single most effective artist conversation I have ever witnessed. Like, hands down, nothing is even close, because it wasn't pretending to be anything other than what it was. Like, it was Detroit. Here's how we behave. Here's how we hold community. Here's how we hold family. We're not going to untangle it for you so that you can have an easy point of entry. We don't need that. Like, just listen and learn and observe. It was amazing. It's one of the most amazing arts moments I've ever witnessed. Sheepy McFly.
That was that was an awesome afternoon. And like we were talking about this a lot in the context of Live in America, the welcoming part. And like, so even though we walked in and it was obviously like a very tight community, like everyone knew when mom and auntie walked in, everyone knew the history before the history and after the history, and like why are telling that history instead of that other history and everything. But we also felt completely like swept into the group, and it was like there was something about its that is important too. That's like, it's not so much that even if you have those spaces that you're describing and Ben was describing about like the like breakfast gathering, like, yeah, they're designated spaces and they're like protected spaces for specific communities of those communities, but they're also like, yeah, you can come, you can stand in the corner for an hour and a half. It's cool if you want to just show up, stand in a corner for an hour and a half, or you can sit down and like, hang on for dear life, like get some of the jokes, not all the jokes, like that's fine. Come on in, do that. But like, it's not closed that way, which I think is nice to point out.
Yeah, you're making me think about, because when I was visiting Detroit, you introduced me to lots of folks, and there were clearly like social rules you were coaching. Like in the social rules had economic drivers and race drivers, and like also like anytime we could eat, we ate. but also like, so you're making a navigation, but it was also the, like, y'all were so loving. And I met so many wonderful people and had like singular conversations in those moments. So it was this like back and forth of like, pay attention, but also like, let's talk.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that led to like very rich conversations. Like I remember the two of you, Kara and Ben, just kicking it. Like as soon as I introduced you, you guys were like swoop, swap. And I was like, I'll just ignore them for a while and like tend to some other matters because you guys like vortex rather quickly into your like fiery worlds, which is awesome. And like, you know, we love to just kick it and talk. Like this lunch can last like 4 hours easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're actually close to time, right, Cynthia? Are we close?
I think so. I kind of started my timer late.
Which is what I do as well, which we were like.
I was actually texting you right now.
This conversation, I'm like, yeah, this feels very Detroit to me. It goes like we're gonna go quickly into a lot of drivers.
Yeah, and what I love is that all of, like all the things we wanted to touch on just like become part of this conversation around hosting and welcoming, but in this way that isn't like you have to break it out and answer all these in particular questions. It's just like the way of being. Yeah.
Well, I think I just want to add to quality snacks. I think that, there's folks in Detroit who, will talk about the art world as though Detroit is just, the first elder cousin of Chelsea or of Art Basel or something. And it's so far away. And I think from being on tour for a lot of years, playing in basements, but also playing in theaters and playing in art spaces, one of the things that you see about the community art spaces, especially post-internet, is that the regionalism shifts away, right? It used to be a thing where you could tell, like, you could basically look at the people who were showing, and then you could look at who the teachers were at the local art schools, and there was a lot of pinging back and forth. But I think one of the things that principally when you think about Detroit spaces and you think about Detroit as a Black space, primarily is the degree of engagement's a lot different. A Chelsea gallery is designed to be unwelcoming. I mean, that's the goal. You're not supposed to be chilling there, right? It's a transactional space. The space is actually a cash register. So I think that when there is this articulation of like what a gallery is supposed to look like or what a gallery is supposed to be, which is primarily to, whatever Jasper John's like artists are the servant class of the rich. There's a moment, I think, where there's a breakage that happens in Detroit and just some of the better spaces where they're not even necessarily community spaces. They're just spaces that are engaged in having engagement. And so if you're engaged in having engagement, you do things like making sure there's good snacks or making sure there's plenty of booze or, the things that, I mean, the last space we ran, it didn't have a bathroom, but we never ran out of beer. And it was usually good beer because we had a hookup. So, you could come, people knew that they could come and drink like what at a, if you bought a 6-pack, it would be like $12, $15, $18 a 6-pack, and you could just take as many as you wanted. Oh, you're taking some with you? Cool. Because that is also a part of it. Like part of the reason that you put PBR in the cooler is because there's always going to be somebody who's going to be like, I'm putting some of these in my pocket, right? Which is why you have to then hire somebody to open up the beer so that they drink the beer on site and it's not a takeaway. But we were like, well, how do we engage that? We know that people leave galleries because they're about to go eat. So like we would make food. And then it was a separate space. So you go in and look at the art and the art would be the art. But then outside is the party. But so that you could engage at either way, if you just want to be someone who looks at art, it's not that we're going to create this kind of like effrontery push you out thing. And I think that is something that's unique to Detroit, partially because so many people are immigrants or very like recent, first, second generation, like it's still a part of their heritage. It's not super disracinated in Detroit compared with other places, partially because of Arab culture, partially because of the many versions of Arab culture that exist in Detroit. And then Black culture, I mean, Black folks and white folks in Detroit basically are either immigrants or they came from the South.
Yeah.
There's not that many like long-term Detroiters who are French Canadian and, were colonialists in the same way. It's kind of a specific, still somewhat locked system. And that system is about, I think, principally engagement. Otherwise, you'll just be alone. You'll be alone in that you can come out of the basement, you'll still be alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, I'm sitting with this phrase, engaged in having engagement. I wrote it down. Like that's something I need to sit with and think about for Live in America. I mean, we think about it all the time, but what does it mean to create a space? I think that sometimes we have like audience talkbacks of like, that's not engagement. Like, how do you program a space so that people will linger and hang out and like take your salsa home with them?
Well, I think just even on the food tip, I mean, one of the things that we teach in all the classes, or I teach in all my classes, but some classes are focused on this, is like how to make soup for 50 people, right? Because a soup can be a stew, can be a sauce. So that can be a lot of things.
Yeah.
But if you think about that dinner, that artist dinner where like maybe you show up to the gallery late and then the gallery's shutting down and you realize that those 12 people are about to go party, a little bit at least. I've been at a lot of those artist dinners either as the artist or as like the friend of the artist or as the something. And they're rarefied spaces, right? So you have this space that's set up to accommodate, like in the case of some galleries, 100, 150 people. And then you have museums that are built up to accommodate however many people. But the principal function is, exit through the gift shop, even if there's no gift shop. But it's hard to engage, and it's considered gauche in most places to be like, welcome to my gallery that I've been sitting in empty for 7 hours. No one's come in.
Right.
I've just been on like Snapchat or whatever,
Well, this is a long lunch we're having, which feels, actually, this is exactly what it feels like to hang out in Detroit to me.
All of a sudden it's 4 a.m. You don't know.
Yeah, like, how did this happen? He already took your salsa and remade it into a new dish and is texting you about it.
That's a real thing that happened.
But we're going to hit, like, just so y'all know, like this idea of what it means to say welcome to someone. We're going to say it over and over and over again. As we think about building this festival and making it go, just that simple word of like making eye contact and saying welcome and meaning it is, I think, a principle that we need. Yeah, at the heart of what we're going to do. But for real, we have to stop now. All right.
Okay.
We will talk more soon and it'll also go along again.